systematic, rigorous investigation of a situation or problem to generate new knowledge or validate the existing one. There must be evidence to show that you're generating new knowledge because your evidence shows there's a gap. There must be evidence to suggest that you're validating new knowledge because your literature review suggests that what exists might be old still or needs to be updated. But the cutting point of the common denominator across generating new knowledge or validating existing one is the systematic approach and the rigor that goes into it. In effect, you can't wake up today and tomorrow write a research that is primary or secondary analysis and say you've done it. Of course, you can share opinions, you can share perspectives, and those can be submitted as manuscripts, but they are not in themselves generating new data. So when we talk about systematic, what does it mean? It means that you follow sets of rules, guidance, principles, procedures in a consistent and logical manner to achieve the goal of the study. Whether you're doing quantitative research, qualitative research, whatever form of research you're doing, implementation, cross-sectional, phenomenological, whatever it is, there are rules governing the way to apply, to conduct that research. There are principles, ethical principles, we'll be talking about them shortly. There are procedures from beginning to end, including the fact that you have to have submitted your protocol for ethics approval when you are doing a research involving human beings, dead or alive, direct or indirect. You do not start a research before obtaining ethics approval. It's only after ethics approval that that's one of the rules governing research procedures. And therefore, when you have an approval and you start your research date predates your ethics approval, then you've breached the laws. And when we say systematic, it means it's planned. It's planned, and that's why there's a protocol. You can't wake up and do a research without a protocol. It's planned, and it's not planned in the head. It's planned in paper, black and white, so that somebody else can copy it. That's why we talk about transparency. And in putting it on paper, many people can think about it, deliberate with you, and ensure efficiency, thoroughness, and accuracy. When we say rigorous, it means we are doing things reliably, credibly, and we'll be talking about that throughout the manuscript writing procedure. What does it mean to be smart? What does research rigor mean to be reliable? What does it mean to be supported by evidence? We'll be taking a look at this throughout the training, the 8 weeks training. So we already touched on thoroughness. Rigor has to do with thoroughness. It also has to do with a systematic approach to everything, including the methodology, the results, and the discussion. Rigor also says that it's evidence-based. Whatever you're doing, there's evidence to use it. Even when all your variables, all the variables you put into your research must be evidence-based. You don't just wake up and say, is sex associated with height? There must be evidence. So there's a possibility. That is why you write your hypothesis, because there's evidence suggesting the possibility of that association. And it involves thinking, critical thinking. That's why critical thinking can be taught. We're not teaching it here. I think we've had sessions about critical thinking. You must be able to continuously ask why. It is why you ask why that you generate new knowledge. Why? Why are people dying? Why are people not drinking water? Why are people taking a lot more of sodas than water? Then that is how you start to think through and raise your research question. Of course, rigor means that your findings can be cross-checked, can be validated, and you can stand before a crowd and defend whatever it is that you're presenting. Because you otherwise, when being cross-checked, you use validated methods. It was thorough. And once it has been cross-examined, there is some suggestion that it is reliable and we can build on this. Why must we be sure that it's rigorous? I think the fundamentals is for us to understand that research is not about manuscript acquisition. We must settle that in our hearts. First and foremost, your number acquisition is a secondary thing. Research is to generate knowledge, to address a knowledge gap, or validate new one, because this all, at the end of the day, sums up for the wealth, health, and wellness of people. It then sums up at the end of the day for national development and growth. It then sums up at the end of the day for global decision making when it comes to policies and programs. And therefore, you find that WHO, all the global bodies, they base their policies that you see that influences decisions about the world, that influences resource distribution around the world, based on the evidence that they generate from researchers. Of course, when WHO is harvesting evidence, it's not going to go to Predator journals. It's not going to go to Q4, Q3. It's going to go to those top journals, Q1 level at the more Cochrane. That's where it goes to harvest the evidence. And therefore, when data from Nigeria, Africa is not there, they would extrapolate from other data. So I want to write about Nigeria. There's no data. I will extrapolate from what I find in Ghana. This is why you must write. And you cannot write because you're acquiring number and go to Predator journals. You must write with regard. If anyone, please don't scribble on this script. Please manage your stuff. Don't scribble, I beg. Please, nobody should scribble. So you must continuously generate rigorous data to enable those that are harvesting the information for policy formulations at all levels to actually have access to the truth. This is not about finding p-values that are significant. If it's not significant, it's not significant. It's about telling the truth, gradually constructing building blocks for us to find the truth that we need to know. Okay, for me, truth actually starts with facts. For many things in the literature, we start with facts. But once facts is tested over time, it is translated to truth. How much of the research we do can be tested over time? I can share with you many, many research that based on falsehood has affected medical practice and has killed people. Because it's about pulling the evidence together. So people sit under the tree, generate data. You did 20 studies, your sample size is 100. You then times it by 5, or you collect 50 times it by 2, or you just sit under the tree and just generate information that you never collected. That's falsehood. And the irony is that you publish it and people pull this together and assume it is evident. That is why we're talking about rigor. You must follow the process. It's about documentation. You must write. You must write a protocol. You collect everything that you are doing must be documented in a way that is accessible, subjective, and peer review. It is. Thanks for those that raised it. We raised it very well. We'll see it in our conclusions. When we say generating new knowledge, it means that we have also, through evidence, identified that there's truly a knowledge gap. And when we're talking about evidence generation to know if there's a knowledge gap, it means you have done a systematic review or a scoping review. It's not because you saw 1 or 2 papers that, I like this thing, no, they've not done it in Ile-Ife. And then you do it. No, you don't just wake up. There must be evidence. That's the rigor we're talking about. But there is truly a knowledge gap. And that's by looking thoroughly through the literature, doing a scoping review or a systematic review to truly show that there's a gap. If you really want to do research, get papers that are known as systematic reviews or literature reviews or scoping reviews and look at what they note as the gap in knowledge. Okay, so gap in knowledge, once again, is across all fields. Engineering, physics, arts, humanities, it's all across all fields. So when we talk about generating knowledge, we talk about originality. It must be novel. It must be adding value to the field. Okay, it's filling gaps in understanding. It's exploration. Okay, not just perspective. Perspective might be the beginning of evidence to show there's a gap and you want to explore. And it must be validated. You use methods that are authentic, accurate, and reliable. Sorry to those that are on the YouTube. And we have a group, so a lot of these things have been discussed extensively in the group. So I'm just running through them because there's a lot more after this. Of course, there must be documentation. by your research paper, by your articles, by doing presentations, and as much as possible. What we're talking about is for the evidence to have impact. That is why when you are writing, remember that the beginning of your research is by submitting your protocol to ethics committee for review. At that point, you would have made a justification for your research. You do not do research because you have money. There must be a justification. That's the social value you bring. So you had written, oh, this research needs to be done because this is the gap in knowledge. And you synthesize that into your introduction, showing that there is gap in knowledge. And not only is there gap in knowledge, it is of value to the scientific field. For example, what I talk about, okay, we have cockroach. Cockroach has 6 legs. And then my research is about looking at the amino acid sequence of the second leg on the right side of a cockroach. Of course, nobody has done that study. So there's a gap in knowledge. But is it of any social value? Why would you waste the money and limited time, limited resources, even if it's your father's money, even if you're Bill Gates' daughter and son, and you have all the money in the world, why waste it to do a research that has no value? So it's not just a gap in knowledge, but there must be value. And it's about building on existing knowledge. To create new knowledge, you must acknowledge what is already in the field and then identify the gaps. You create good knowledge through collaboration. We'll be taking a talk on team building, and you would learn to understand that when we're talking about research in this generation, it's not siloed research, it's transdisciplinary research. You must be able to come together with everything you know in science, humanities, arts, medicines, dentistry, whatever field, to address a new knowledge, whatever it is, whatever field it is, however you define it, to generate knowledge in gap. We must all come together to generate high quality evidence to be able to impact our generation for good. And we then went to talk about what is it when you are validating existing knowledge. All right, so there might be existing knowledge, theories, concepts, even primary information, accuracy is what we know before COVID, the same thing we know after COVID, is what we know before the Ebola time, the same thing after Ebola, is what we know before Trump's period, the same thing we're knowing after Trump's administration. So you want to validate what has existed, and it must be done through a process that is just sound and trustworthy. What you're trying to do is verify. You confirm with rigor. You want to use procedures that are replicable. And you want to compare the information. You want to update the information. You definitely would generate it from credible sources, and it must be context relevant. It's about critically evaluating what exists. It might be the methodology. It might be the theories informing it. For example, I want to look at caries, and I'm a dentist. I trained as a dentist, so I know about caries, a hole in the tooth. We've all known forever that the poorer people are worse affected by caries. So I might decide that, oh, that's how they've looked at it. Let me look at it through the gender lens. Let me look at it through the feminist lens. It's an old knowledge, existing knowledge. But now I'm starting to look at it through some other lens. Oh, let me look at it through the human rights lens. Oh, let me look at it through public health lens. It's the same problem that has been there for 100 years. But I'm trying to validate existing knowledge, looking at it through newer frames. So this is the
Sorry to
kind of thing.
interrupt you, ma. Apologies to
Pardon?
interrupt. Apologies to interrupt. Please, someone is writing on the screen. Please, if you have, please kindly stop, otherwise you'll be ejected. I don't know who the person is. Sorry, ma. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And then, of course, once you do this, you must communicate in a way that is truthful. Okay. One of the things I share is that you do a statistical analysis, you get in your analysis, you know that you got 0.0052, which is not valid. But because you just want it to be valid by force, you report 0.05 and say, you caught it, you rounded it up. That's not truthful. Okay. So it must be transparent, and information must be disseminated. Once you do research, you do not disseminate the research, it's unethical. It's unethical. Why? Because when you do not disseminate research, the people will go and acquire new fundings to do what is already known but is sitting under the table. It's wasting time. Human resources is wasting financial resources. When we have the truth, and it's wasting time, we want to get to the truth as soon as possible so as to save and improve the quality of lives of everybody, whether you're working on a car or you're working on technology. It's all about the wellness and development of nations and individuals. So you must communicate whatever you find. And please note that communication means it goes through peer review process. Once again, we emphasized over and over, please do not take papers to peer predator journals. There must be rigor in peer review. And that's why people, WHO, policymakers trust Q1 journals, because Q1 journals is about rigor. You go through peer review, not just, you just see them, one paper, one journal that says is engineering, then it sends it to you in accounting. Please help us to review. Of course, there's no thorough review there. When you actually get into Q1, Q2 journals, they study, they invite experts. If you the scribbler is if you want something, please help me to look for, if she continues to scribble, please, or he, please just eject. So the peer review looks for flaws, errors, and ensures that what you truly are sharing with the world, that you're asking us as the world to depend on, is flawless. And believe me, I tell people and I tell my peer, look, check it out. If you have truly done valid research and you have addressed gap in knowledge, people will quote your manuscript. So if you generate manuscript nobody has quoted in 10 years, 5 years, you should know that there's likely a problem with your paper. It's not touchable, simple. Even you yourself find it untouchable for you not to have used it and quoted it. So in summary, we talked about research being a systematic inquiry that is an objective, not subjective exploration. I hope sometime I'll be able to share with you those things that inform subjectivity. Even when you're doing a systematic inquiry, your subjectivity can affect the objectivity of the exploration. You bring your background, you bring your judgment. For example, I'm doing a study on females, on adolescents, and then I find out that they are they are having multiple sex partners, and then your discussion, the promiscuous girls in our society, they need to be going to church every day. You're just bringing your values, and once you do that, please check out Ifeanyi Wa. Could you please check this person out? Just move them away. The name is Ifeanyi Wa. I can see it, and it's still scribbling. Please just exit the person. Thank you very much. So your subjectivity, it just affects it. It affects the way, it even affects the way you generate a research question. Least of all, your interpretation. I remember I saw a paper once where they did a study. Let's say out of 10, 6 was a female and 4 was male. Definitely without even using a calculator, you know that there's really no significance. This person wrote about 3 pages discussion on 6 versus 4. That obviously was not significant, but you can see the bias. He just wanted to tell the story of the female. And he went to town, about 3 pages of discussion. His bias. His bias interpretation. So you must use structured methodology. Validation is very important amongst peer, and that's why peer review is very important. Documents you must disseminate. It's ethical to disseminate. Please exit ITEL. Remember, we do not allow people without. Please, could use anybody that's something is not labeled. Please exit them. That device is not labeled. Please exit them. Don't want wahala. When you do these things, spammers come in. Have been in spaces where spammers can be damaging. So please exit everybody that device is not labeled. It's a simple principle in Zoom. You must label your device. And then ethical consideration will take a little more look at that. And you must ensure that the process is iterative. I'll stop sharing now and bring up the slide where we did summarize the discussions. Just give me a minute. So at the end of our first day discussion, based on that slide that I just shared, we raised these 5 questions. What is a systematic approach? What is rigor? What are the challenges researchers face in generating and validating new knowledge? And how does research contribute to solving real-world problems? And when you do this, what are the ethical considerations? These are the summaries of the things we discussed. First, when we talked about systematic approach and research reliability, we noted that systematic approach ensures replicability and consistency in the research. Once you follow a systematic process, and please, everybody should know there are research guidelines. Every single type of research you want to do in this world, please check Equator. There is a guideline for how you do and report it. There is a guideline for what you look for. So that way, every research can be comparable. Okay, you can't just wake up and do your own. You can't just wake up and first write methodology before you write introduction of a manuscript. There is a guideline. You can't first end up by saying conclusion, then you come back to results and then come back to introduction. There is a guideline. And that's the same thing for every research. There is a guideline. There's a structured methodology that reduces bias and increases transparency. And peer review, we all agree that peer review and adhering to these research guidelines is a mark of validity. When we talked about research credibility and rigor, we noted on the platform that thorough data collection and analysis strengthens the credibility of the research finding. We emphasize peer review as a critical step for ensuring quality. So when you miss out on that, what you have to share with the world is definitely not reliable and has little credibility. And even when we talk about rigor, it is the entire process. So your rigor starts by your literature review to truly identify if there is a gap or not. It's not reading one manuscript or reading 2 manuscripts. It is not, because that will be based on an assumption that there's a gap in knowledge. It's about critically reading the review literature, doing scoping review, systematic review, if there's a need for that. But you can't just read one paper and say there's a gap in knowledge. You must truly establish there's a gap in knowledge and then invest your resources, be it human, time, and equipment, on addressing that gap in knowledge. We talked about challenges in conducting research. We talked about resource constraints, ethical concerns, data limitations, as well as reproducibility issues. I put them in red because you will find out that at the end of the day, we did reach consensus that this in itself is not a challenge for research. And that these are things that you should take consideration of at the beginning of your research, so that the things you want to do still has rigor and credibility. You cannot go into a research and say, oh, it's because of resources, it's because I couldn't get to marginalized people, it's because of language that I did not do what I needed to do. Those are considerations that you should have taken in the planning of your research. And that when we do research, we want to bridge knowledge between the academic research and practical application. We highlighted the need for translational research. I think one of the participants on the platform did note this very strongly. We talked about research that is community driven to ensure real life impact, not just sitting in your office and coming up with a research problem, but truly validating that this is truly a problem, because you as a researcher might see things differently and the community is seeing differently. And this is about evidence generation so that what you do can be integrated into national frameworks and therefore contribute to national development. I tell people that if Nigeria, apologies, I know that the majority of participants here are from Nigeria. If Nigeria is not doing well, it's because of you, researchers. Simple. You're not generating the evidence to enable your leaders to do well. You're not generating, or you're generating and it's not getting to them. If you do your research and put it under the table, why would the policymaker be doing research where you, the researcher, cannot read the millions in your field? Why will the policymaker say? But if you nurse this research in a way that you develop white papers at all times, and make it available to our leaders in those spaces, they will come to you to help inform policies. And these are the things that have made nations in China, Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan. This is what has made a difference for their own nations. And that's what continues to keep nations like Europe and America great. It is we that is disappointing this country. It's not T-Pain or any other person. We did note about ethical consideration, and I'll be taking us a little bit more on that, about transparency and integrity is a way to prevent misconduct. And we once again must avoid predator journals. And culture can influence. But the big thing I like about this slide is the fact that all those things we talked about, challenges, these ones, they can contribute to ethical dilemmas. Okay, they can contribute to ethical dilemmas, but not in itself limiting research. There's Ibrahim Latif. Ibrahim Latif. Please check Ibrahim Latif out. Thank you, Kudus. Ibrahim Latif. Please check Ibrahim Latif out. Thank you. So this is the thing we then considered to when we all, taught together that when we are generating knowledge, when we're doing research, it must use a structured approach. Because with structured approach, it is reliable, it enhances reproducibility, and it strengthens credibility. This was our consensus. We also noted that part of rigor is about literature review, because that will help us truly identify the gap in knowledge rather than assume there's a gap in knowledge. And we must please consider ethics to ensure not only the participants' protection, but also to ensure data integrity and research accountability. We have noted critically that there's a lot of gap in when it means translating research. We find that how do our academic findings translate to real-world implementation? This is a gap, and I hope somebody on this platform can organize a Zoom call or a webinar that enables us to learn about translational research. Kudus maybe will list this as one of the seminars, webinars we'll be doing. But if there's anyone that has capability to do this, please do it. This is a gap we definitely identify. We, however, reach consensus that financial constraint does not necessarily limit rigor. It may affect scope. You want to do the whole of Nigeria in 36 states, but you only have money for one state. Do one state. Don't do 36 states and say it's because of your finance that you can't do rigor. Financial constraint does not limit rigor. It only affects scope. Okay. One might make the case that because you don't have finances, you cannot get an equipment, then don't do it. Do what you have money for. Don't use 24th century technique because you don't have money. Then do something that you have money for. Okay. And these were the gaps also that we noted, that we need formal training on translational research to enhance the translation of our research findings to real-world applications, and that there's a need for better strategies to overcome funding limitations and data collection barriers, especially in low-resource countries. To share with you how I have overcome funding limitations in my own world. What I do, many of us do know that we do out-of-pocket expenses a lot because locally we don't have funds. Very early in my career, and thanks to Professor Kike Kolawole, who led the first study I did that way, which is the oral habit, 8 of us came together and pulled our resources together. 8 of us. So when we pulled our resources together, each person's study objective was accommodated in that research protocol. So Morenike, you lead 1, Kike, you lead 2, everybody had. So instead of each one of us doing one objective, we all pulled the funds together. We would do the 8 objective in that study, but we had resources to do the first population level study in Ile-Ife. So we pulled all our questionnaire, all of it together, got ethics approval. Each person was leading. But if I had done it alone, I could never have gotten the 4 million to have done that population level study. But because we all pulled it together, we were able to do population level study. And not only did we do population level study, we were able to hire a statistician who helped us from the very beginning to design, and we were able to do quality analysis. At the end of the day, we got 11 manuscripts rather than 8 from that pulley. And till today, our paper that we produced, our reference paper, because it was thorough. So funding limitations is only challenging and critical thinking about how to address it. I find it very strange for people in the academia who are supposed to solve problems to continue to complain about problems. It's very strange to me because problems is your food. Is the basis for your research question. You are here in academia to solve problems. So why would you be saying problem is limiting you when you are there to solve problems? So who's going to solve problems? That's why you're in the academia. That's what your world is. It's about solving problems. So if there's a funding problem, think about it critically and solve it. Solve it. Stop making it a limitation. And so for us, and because of that, I've grown in doing that. I've had partnerships, international partnerships, leading research teams that bring all kinds of expertise on the table, and together we do our research, without funding limitation being a problem. Somebody I remember one of the things we did, and somebody in England, in the UK, he got grants to implement his own side of the study. But I didn't have. I used my own network to generate the research on my study. There's one publication we had just about 2-3 days ago from the Nigerian, and three of us, two from Ife, one from Ibadan. There were some other people that were supposed to come. We came together. The person in Ibadan came to Ife to come and do the analysis because we could generate the information, but we don't have the skills for the analysis. And that way we generated our own Nigerian data to contribute to international studies. Think critically and solve the challenges that faces you in doing your research. Because you're not doing research and generating the manuscript is giving Nigeria a problem. We do not have data in the global space. Not that we don't have data, we are not publishing in the right places, or we're not publishing. So there isn't evidence for the globe to take action on our behalf, and therefore we're losing out on the resources in the globe. We can do better. Okay. On that note, I'll take us in the next 20 minutes, very fast or less than, in ethical consideration. We have already agreed that research is a systematic investigation. Not only is it systematic, it must have generalizable knowledge that is applied beyond one or two persons. That this is the main goal for the majority. Of course, there's something called personalized care, personalized medicines, but generally, research is about being generalizable. So you can't do a research in Ile-Ife local government and then say you're doing research on Nigeria. No, it isn't. It's for Ile-Ife local government. At least allow it to be generalizable to Ile-Ife local government or other local governments that are close to it in profile. But it is definitely not representing Nigeria. So when we look at research ethics, it is definitely about good and bad, following the codes of conduct. We'll be looking at the codes of conduct and its my shift based on the content when we reflect on your manuscript. So it's a universal principle. When we talk about respect for persons and community, it implies first that every individual okay. Sorry,
No, I'm not sure if it's from your hand or my hand. It seems you are
I
breaking.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes, it's because I had a call, so I also paused.
Oh,
So respect for person is about recognizing that the person that is involved in your research is an autonomous agent and he has a right to say yes or no. He has a right to behave the way he or she behaves. You cannot force your research on people. They must participate voluntarily. Okay. And also, when you design your research, please respect local cultures. Your research findings may make us change our culture. But when you're going into the research, you must first respect our culture. For example, like I say, you don't go to the north and then you want to enter confines of women and you say you're a male. I can enter. What is wrong? This is Beijing now. This is 20th century. How can a man not? I beg, don't do that. In the South, you can do a man can do a vaginal examination. For a woman, there's nothing. It's not an issue. In the north, it's an issue. So you don't go to the north and then open your hair and then say, oh, this is ask things to change, but that's what it is. When we respect persons, it's about ensuring that informed consent is obtained. Please do not let this just be a practice because you want to get your ethics clearance. You must get consent on the field. And you get it from a competent person to enable the person to take a voluntary decision after you have provided adequate information in a language the person understands. Once again, informed consent is taking consent from a competent person. A child that is 5 years old is not 5 years old is not competent to give informed consent. For that person is assent and you know it's consent from the parent. Even a 12-year-old is considered not to be competent because their risk-taking ability is very poor. So they give assent and the parent gives consent for most parts. Okay, please note that this is basic. And then the decision must be taken voluntarily. You cannot force people to take decisions, including the fact that you do questionnaire and put compulsory. I see that's a lot. I mean, ethics is about voluntary. Then you put a compulsory thing to fill a questionnaire. Why must you make it compulsory for me? For me, when I see those questionnaires, I just drop, I just leave. You can't force me to because it's voluntary. Ethics is about voluntary. And that is happens after you have given me adequate information in a language that I understand. Don't go to a Yoruba person and give consent in English. And when we say language that is understood, you use instruments that is designed for the language. Beneficence is about maximizing the benefit and minimizing the harm that people that should do research which are exposed to. It makes you take cognizance of all the possible risks, and there are 5 risks in research, and address them. And as much as possible, ensure that benefits come into the community. When you're talking about research, these are the 5 forms of risk. It can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be social, it can be financial and legal. Please take care of all this risk. There is no research that has no risk. Every single research has risk. What there is that it can be minimal, it can be moderate, it can be high. So it can be low, moderate, or high, but it cannot be zero. There is no zero risk. If you're asking people to come for your research to and fro, please give them transport reimbursement so as to reduce the financial risk. You must eliminate it, not even reduce it. If somebody is doing malaria and you want to look at the chest investigations for malaria, do not transfer the cost of the chest X-ray to them. Pay for the chest X-ray. Don't, because of your research, put people in financial ruins. For example, you want to look at 1 million parameters, hematological parameters, when the person does not even need it, and then you tell them to do it for your research sake. That is risk, and we do it a lot in this country. Okay, and then finally, we'd also look at special populations, people that you abuse and then they cannot make noise. Please, this is why ethics committee must look at this. Children, women, stigmatized populations. When we talk about non-maleficence, we say do no harm. So even if research does not benefit, many research don't benefit the community, but at least do not do them harm. Do not put them worse off. Okay, because the injury to one person for a communal good is ethically unacceptable. This is what the problem with the Nazi study was all about. They want to generate information for the general good, but to extreme detriment and harm to an individual. This is where ethics differs from public health. Public health is about the good of the majority. Ethics is about addressing the injury that one person can be exposed to. It's about the one person. It's about the minorities that will be hurt. This is what ethics is. And justice is about sharing the burden of research. So you cannot be doing research in a low-income country to the benefit of high-income country. You cannot go and collect data in the poor community for the benefit of the good of those in high income. You must distribute the benefit and distribute the harm, potential harm that there is. You can't skew it to vulnerable populations. And when we talk about vulnerable populations, we're talking about the poor, the elderly, the homeless, the prisoners, and people with mental health problems, women, sex workers, people that are stigmatized, people not protected by the law, and people who, even when they are, the Constitution talks about them, they do not have the power in the place to speak up for themselves. So ethics principles are codes to help us protect the rights and integrity and safety of people who participate in research, directly and indirectly. So when we talk about research ethics, we're talking about the design. So you must generate knowledge that is of value. You must have a fair selection of your study participants to obey the principle of justice. There must be a favorable balance between the benefit and the risk. Don't bring people to your community. Don't open doors to your community just because one researcher gave you your organization money. And at the end of the day, you don't benefit from the results. It's the same thing that happened with hepatitis research. Hepatitis research was done in low-income countries because we have the high population and high prevalence of hepatitis. But the benefit was to the global north. It took 40 years for us to have information available to us in low-income countries. This was the thing that HIV research tried to ameliorate. But who opens the door? It's you, the elites. It's you, the elites, that opens the door for the exploitation. So be conscious of this. Okay, please ensure that we always do get ethics approval before we do our study and ensure that the design that we do is applicable and it doesn't have ethical flaws. Ensure that you collect valid, informed consent, ensuring that people understand what you want to do, and that's about respecting persons. Safety and well-being of enrolled participants must be guaranteed. And that way you are respecting the person, you're ensuring beneficence and non-maleficence. You're ensuring that competent persons are the investigators to conduct the research, and the findings must be disseminated. Please look at all guidelines. Dissemination is an ethical requirement. When you do research and you put it on the shelves, it's disrespecting ethics, and it's a waste of resources that we don't have. So how do we apply this? Please note that when you write to your introduction in your manuscript, which is a summary of what is known in the field, there's an Oluyemisi also trying to write. For those, please look for Oluyemisi. She's scribbling.
Okay.
So please note that in your introduction of your manuscript, you must let us know, summarize what is known on the gap in the field. You must put a justification why your study is important. And when and without the justification, what you're doing is wasting finite resources. And this, doing a proper introduction of your manuscript, is about respecting the principles of beneficence. Your study objective must be SMART. SMART states S is specific, M is measurable, A is appropriate, which means that you are using reliable instruments to measure. And your T tells us that the study cannot be finished. It happened within a time period. So when you have a SMART objective, you are respecting the principle of beneficence. When you go into a research that does not have a SMART objective, it is not you're doing harm. You're doing harm because that research can never be used, and you have wasted resources, finite resources. So having a SMART objective is respecting the principle of beneficence. Your study design also needs to be appropriate for the objective. It is driven by the objective. A wrong design is unethical, it's a waste of resource, the result cannot be used, and what you've done is violate the principle of non-maleficence. Study participants must be chosen appropriately. Think critically about the inclusion criteria. Think critically about the exclusion criteria. Please note that exclusion criteria is not the opposite of inclusion criteria. Exclusion criteria aims to eliminate study confounders. Okay, and you cannot just exclude people because you cannot find them. For example, in Nigeria, you want to do contraceptive studies. You know that in the north, 9-year-old people are married and having children. Then you say, oh, I'm excluding people below 18 years. Your study is not applicable for the country because there's no justification for excluding people below 18 years, but you have excluded because you cannot do wahala of conformed consent. So that's an unjust exclusion. Okay, so there must be justification for exclusion. There must be justification for study sites. Even if you're taking a study site out of convenience, then state it that is out of convenience. Okay? So unlawful exclusion is disrespecting the principle of justice. Sample size also must be calculated. I read too many manuscripts from Nigeria, there's no sample size. That means you're not telling us that the study is powered enough to make the appropriate deductions you want to do. You do a quantitative study without sample size. Please take it from me. You have to apply this. We do know that in terms of qualitative, you talk about saturation and 12 might be minimum. But there are times I've had studies that the sample size is 54. I remember when we talked last week about sample size from the qualitative and webinar. Sample size does not have to be 12. There must be critical reasoning behind your sample size, even if it's a qualitative research. And there must be justification. Please note that in ethics, 20% is the maximum increase in sample size. The sample size you calculate is the maximum sample size. It's not the minimum. And why is it maximum? Because every one person that you unduly expose to risk is not validated. If you can answer your question with a sample size of 100, why increase it to 101 when you know that one is unduly exposed to risk and is not answering your question? So you must spend time to calculate your sample size, taking care of everything you need to take care of, and then get your maximum sample size, and you can only increase it validly by 20%. Otherwise, you will be disrespecting the principle of non-maleficence. Study procedure is very important. You must write in detail your study procedure. It cannot be a 5-line sentence. You want to ensure appropriate sampling, which respects the principle of justice. You want to use the least invasive procedures, whether qualitative or quantitative. It's a non-maleficence. You review procedures and ensure that all risks are mitigated, respecting the principle of non-maleficence. Respect the laws of the land in what you're doing. If the law of the land says 8 years old is adult, then 8 years old is adult. And if there are things you must report, please report them. Respect norms and traditions when you are practicing, and use appropriate methodology. Use the appropriate instrument. Please ensure that you validate instrument. Don't just wake up today, develop instrument, and go to the field. Say the purpose, SIB. Every instrument must have construct and content validation. They must use a culturally appropriate languages so as to facilitate disclosure. Don't just do things and collect data for data's sake. You are collecting data. You see this person's mind is not there. Everything you're saying is just saying yes, 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 yes. You know that there's something wrong. It's not about just collecting data. So as much as possible, whatever data you use in the field, you want to ensure that it can achieve the objective that it is. Remember rigor. So your instruments must ensure rigor. So it must have been tested for construct and content and reliability, so that whatever it is saying is the truth. It's generating the truth. Interpretation of your question is the same for every person, whether I'm black or white, as long as I'm in that same context. All right. And that is respecting the principles of non-maleficence. Your data analysis must be thorough. You cannot write a data analysis section in the manuscript and write 3 sentences. Say the purpose, SIB. It shows no rigor. You must explain to us what is dependent or independent, what your univariate analysis are, what your bivariate analysis are, what are your inferential analysis. If you have models for developing, you tell us. A good data analysis section respects the principle of justice. And finally, please note that you must disseminate. Once again, it's unethical to disseminate. When you do not disseminate, you're wasting resources. And you are delaying the finding of the truth by putting your data under the shelf. There's so many under the shelf. Anywhere in the developed world, whether you're doing undergraduate, postgraduate research, you do rigor and you publish. Sweden, even as an undergraduate, you do rigor and publish. Here, even at PhD, you're still putting it on the shelf. It's a waste of resources. How can a nation develop that way when truths are put on the shelf and only you and your supervisor knows the truth? No nation develops that way. So you must disseminate, and there's multiple ways to disseminate. Go to conferences, publish paper, write blogs, join conversation, write lay language, response to question. And this respects the principle of beneficence. Please note that there must be a budget. Not all ethics committee require for this, some of it. This is because we do not want you exploiting individuals, transferring the cost of your research unethically to study participants, which we do a lot in Nigeria, and thereby disrespect the principle of non-maleficence. You must have a budget. And cut your cloth according to your cloth. Don't cut it according to your sizes, according to your cloth. Okay? So that is why budget is important. Please, as much as possible, it's not just about protocol. Go beyond the show of ethics, actually practice ethics. For those of you that do thesis writing, the last 2 slides is about you. Please ensure that your thesis is about addressing a gap. Follow the rules of putting your thesis together as put together by your institution. Provide as much details as possible. Follow the guidelines in your university, but also follow the research guidelines. Share only factual information. Don't put falsehood. Acknowledge limitations. And please always submit quality thesis. Please don't conduct a research without ethics approval. There are too many theses produced in this country that has no ethics approval. Please avoid plagiarism, fabrication, and falsifying information. We know people go to Kano collect thesis in Kano and come and do it in Ileife. That's telling lies. That's plagiarism. Don't fabricate. Don't do 20 and then multiply it by 5 and tell us that you did 100. Don't falsify. Don't get 0.052 and say you got 0.05 is statistically important. These are all wrong. It's not about you. Research is not about you. Once again, I say it, your research is only a building block for us to get facts and then eventually get truth. Don't do these things. It's not about you. Then don't overgeneralize or oversimplify. Don't discard your raw data. When you've collected your data, please keep it for 10 years after publication. Some even keep it for 15 years. Institutions should have policies for how long they keep. I think in IFE, the policies we've developed is about 10 years. Keep your raw data for 10 years. And we cannot overemphasize, please do not publish in Predator journals. Please do not. It is harmful. Please do not. Because the public reading and publics read journals. Please note, publics do. They will think they don't know Predator journals. You're the one that has competency to do it. So when they read it, they think it's the truth. Please don't. Please don't. Please don't. And please don't submit your manuscripts to multiple journals at the same time. You submit to one, once they reject, you move to another. Don't do multiple. I've seen it. That you see this article, I saw it in that journal. Please don't do. On that note, I want to say thank you for listening, and I look forward to answering your questions. Over to you, Kudus. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Don't do Predator journal. That's one key one. Thank you again. I think we'll go to the chat box to pick questions. There are a lot of questions on the chat box. I will just start from the very first one, which is, how can we understand the word originality in research in practical ways? Sometimes it is an enigma to me.
Thank you for that critical question. Originality, I think for me, is about creativity. It's about novelty. It's about you being there. It's about contextualizing your context. Okay, let me tell you for one thing that I felt was novel for me. We were doing a research. We wanted to answer a question about sexual harassment that is happening in hospitals. Who are these ones doing it? The people doing harassment will not be them writing about it in manuscript publications. I think for me, that was original creativity in itself. We went to scope newspapers published online. We scoped newspapers and we published that paper. But it was an originality because being able to answer that question that was critical, we can't find it in journal publications. So we went to where we can find it and we got it published. I've never seen any scoping review done using scoping from newspapers. They scope from journals, published journals, or published data, or primary data. So for me, that was originality, that was creativity, and that sets the pace for future, that kind of research to be done in future. So originality takes a lot of creativity to go into it. It doesn't mean that you're doing things all the time new, but once you are answering a gap in knowledge, you will find out that to be able to answer that gap in knowledge, you might have to be original in the thing you do, because it's a gap because they haven't been able to say it, or there's a gap, maybe they don't even know it's a gap, but many times those gaps is because they haven't thought through how to answer it, and it might mean you doing something that hasn't been done before to be able to answer that question. I hope that answers the question. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ma. This is a quick one. Is ethical approval required for an abstract and a manuscript when using secondary data?
Yes. Once you're using secondary data, usually it's what is this time? There are 3 types of ethics review that you do. The last one is full committee, expedited, and the first one. There's one that they do that they waive consent, but you must have ethics approval for secondary data analysis. Over.
Okay. This person is asking, Ma, do you mean by getting a paper that is a systematic review or a gap review?
I don't understand the question.
I don't understand the question. Maybe you can rewrite it, please. Scoping review, why not check it out? Oh, sorry. Quickly, please, Ma, what is the minimum number of papers we need to review in our research?
I have no idea. You have to decide that. Well, I would not, I cannot imagine anyone writing a manuscript that's did not review five, but please know I'm not prescribing five as the minimum. You will have to, I'm sure that the number would depend on what it is that you're investigating. The best thing to do many times is if you have a systematic, that's how I do. When I want to do a topic, I first go, what is there a systematic review on this topic? Once you find a systematic review, a scopy review on the topic, they will tell you the gap. In that case, I've only read one, but that person that did it has already read 5, 10, 15, 45. Okay. I'm currently doing my PhD and I'm answering some research questions. So I'm looking at scoping review or systematic review that have developed conceptual framework for the research question. So I'm not going to read 50 papers. I'll just use that conceptual framework that they are built based on their own review and I take it forward. So depending on what you want to do, but if there has been no scoping review or systematic review done to answer that your research question, that means you're going to do a lot more reading. Thank you. Over.
Yeah, somebody asked what scoping review is.
That's another session. A brilliant question, but we'll have to do that at another session. Okay. It's
Oh,
about scoping review is mapping the publication landscape about the subtopics you've done. So this person will pull all the research that has been done on that topic they want to review and map it. Oh, this is the number of manuscript that has been done. This is what it says about gender. This is what it says about the research topic. That's mapping. Systematic review is a lot more rigorous because it doesn't only pull a map, but even those things that has gone by map, he not assesses for risk and a lot of other things and then generates the evidence based on rigorous research outcomes. It's a lot more deeper than scoping, but scoping usually forms the fundamentals for the systematic. I hope that helps you in a little way. But you have asked a brilliant question, and if I were you, I would look for a way to answer that question. It's very powerful when you acquire that skill. Over to you, Kudus.
yeah. One person is asking if do you mean we can't make question compulsory in our questionnaire?
No, it's unethical. Thank you.
Regarding challenges experienced in research conduct, how can one convince prospective participants to participate in a study that has moderate or minimal risk? Thank you, ma.
You don't need to convince. Please ask people everywhere in the world. Everybody competes. If you do if you have designed a research in a way that it minimizes risk and maximizes benefit, no matter the level of um, risk involved, you find people participating. Any clinical trial is high risk. Every clinical trial in the world is high risk, but they get participants. The thing that you find out is that the participants try to grow towards the end. But if your risk is if the research has no value to the people that you are dealing with, then it's a problem. I remember a friend sharing, not a friend, a participant in a research workshop was talking about she's an ophthalmologist, so they wanted to buy the head of goats in the market for the eye purpose. They returned the money. Why? Because they didn't sensitize the community. So when they went the first time, the second time, all the markets knew that somebody were coming for rituals. They sent back the grant. They had grant too. They sent back the grant money because the community wasn't sensitized. I mean, I don't even know how I got to that. Please continue to produce. We only have 1 more minute left. Kudus, are you there?
Thank you, ma. Yes, I am. So, someone is asking, you keep making reference to guidelines for different type of research. That's Equator. The person is asking where to get it. That's
Just Google Equator, and you will see Equator. It will list you all the millions and one guideline. Just go Google Equator. Equator will then show you all the research guidelines. If you want to do cross-sectional, there's a guideline. If you want to do qualitative, there's a guideline. If you want to do impactive, there's a guideline. If you want to do financial, there's a guideline for every kind of research. Just Google Equator. You find it. Thank you. I think we can only take one more question, and
millions
we'll
of
close for today.
there are millions of thank you messages. I'm trying to scroll to see if there's any question in between. Okay, mention starting a blog based on your research. Please shed more light.
Yeah, I'm doing. I started a platform to be able to build competencies. You can start a blog to do many things. well, no, blog is about writing about something. So you can write small things, you can write things to people, but you can start a WhatsApp platform. I see Doshima is on the platform. She's answering so many questions
Yeah, yeah.
brilliantly. Thank you, Doshima. You're just doing so well. Doshima, by now you should have a WhatsApp platform for yourself. Doshima does beautifully well, brilliantly with research. But we started with some years back. But I can see she's answering so many questions. I think on that note, we'll have to say thank you. It's 1 hour on the dot. For those of us that are on the platform, please take your questions back to the platform and then we can continue to engage. On that note, I want to thank you for being here and looking forward to you participating next week. Those on the YouTube, thanks for being here also. Please join us next week. We will share the link. Bye. Over to you, just.
Thank you very much. So we'll see you next week. Thank you. Bye.